Hello and welcome to another update as we cover the latest developments from the front line as Ukraine's final push is in full swing throughout the front line, especially here in the Zaporizhzhia area, but also by Bakhmut. Starting out in the Robotyne direction, the Ukrainian forces are focusing in four different directions. They are focusing south of Robotyne in the direction of Novoprokopivka, to the east in the direction of Novopokrovka, to the east in the direction of Verbove, and to the south of that location. So the Ukrainian forces are here focusing heavily on the east, but also in the direction of the south. The reason for this is that if we look at the topographic map, we can see the location of Robotyne right here, and the elevation is higher by the red and lower by the blue. So this is the lowest point and this is the highest point. So we can see Robotyne here, Novoprokopivka here, Verbove here, and so on. And from that we can see that the areas in which the Ukrainians are advancing are within the low grounds, and then they're moving slowly to the higher grounds. So we can see that the Ukrainian forces are moving through these low ground areas, trying to push the Russian forces back from these positions, and the Russians have then retreated to the heights, which allowed the Ukrainians to then move in and force their way to the main line of defense of the Russian forces, which moves through the south of Novoprokopivka to Ilchenkovo here to the south, and then eastwards by the high ground. So the Russian forces have built their trenches by the high grounds and are overlooking the fields in which the Ukrainian forces are advancing. And the Ukrainian forces are moving through the low grounds to Verbove, and to the south of Verbove we have the main trenches by the Russian forces, which again are located by the high grounds. So the Russian forces are here making use of the high grounds to attack the advancing Ukrainian forces. But we also did see the Ukrainian forces attacking to the south of Robotyne, and here we can see that it is located by the high grounds. So this is the area in which the Ukrainians have high ground positions. And as such, this is why we see that the Russian forces have decided to counterattack by Robotyne. According to the latest news, the Russian forces should have pushed the Ukrainian forces out of southern Robotyne, which they recently captured in the latest update. However, there's been no update by Syriac Maps, so I'm waiting until that for territorial changes. But according to Russian sources, the Russian forces started a counterattack where they started shelling the north of Robotyne, and they had attacked the center from the western positions. In this counterattack, they managed to get to the center, and then they moved southwards, pushing out the Ukrainian forces and recapturing the trenches to the south of Robotyne. Again, this is all located in the high grounds in comparison to these whole areas to the east of Robotyne, all being located in the low grounds. So we see that the Ukrainian forces, according to Russian sources, were pushed out of the south of Robotyne, but because of the destruction within Robotyne, it is barely a village that can be called a village anymore due to the sheer destruction within it, and as such it is difficult to hold on to any positions within the village, which is why this counterattack makes sense. If the Russians manage to push the Ukrainian forces out of southern Robotyne, they will be able to recapture the trenches, and they'll be able to stand their positions within them at the high ground. And the Ukrainians being pushed out of Robotyne makes sense because it is difficult to hold any positions within it. There's no trenches within it except for the northern parts, which is why we saw the Ukrainian forces being shelled in the northern parts. That is because that would be where they have their main forces, in the trenches at the north of Robotyne. Meanwhile, the southern parts doesn't have any trenches except for this one, and a second one to the east of Robotyne, which is to the east of the village. This is why when the Russians attacked from the west, from their own trenches, they were able to attack where the Ukrainians were most vulnerable. And if they managed to flank Ukrainian positions, then it makes sense that they managed to capture it. However, there's been no report from Syriac Maps, so I am keeping it at this for now. So for Robotyne, according to Russian sources, the southern parts have returned to a gray zone. The Russians recaptured the trenches to the south of the village. The Ukrainian forces still hold their positions in the center and northern parts of the village. Then we move on to the Uroshaine area, and here between Novomykhailivka and Uroshaine, the Ukrainian forces are attacking across the whole front. They're attacking to the east of Urushaina towards the Russian forward positions here. They're moving and attacking in the direction of Novodonetsk from the western parts and the northern parts, trying to attack the supply line here to the south of the village while attacking head-on from the northern parts. We also see fighting by Novomayorsk in the direction of Shevchenkove and to the south of Novomikhailivka, where the Ukrainian forces managed to advance slightly, pushing Russian forces back from positions they gained a few months back and attacking the direction of Solotke. So what we're seeing is that the Ukrainian forces have started their final push across from Oryhiv towards Urushaina. And I say final push because this is the main push where they are using their final forces. Of their reserves they have left, they don't have enough to make another major push. So this is the main push and final push of the offensive. If this does not bring results, nothing will in this offensive. So this is the final push of the Ukrainian forces. Then we go to the Bakhmut area, where here we see the Ukrainian forces south of Andriivka pushing towards the railways and have managed to reach it, flanking the Russian positions here to the south of Klishchiivka in direction of Bakhmut. As for the Challenger 2 that was lost yesterday, according to this drone footage here, we see that not only it was lost, but also a couple of armored vehicles and pickup trucks, as the Ukrainians were using this road as a supply road. So the Ukrainian forces were moving through it. According to some geolocations, it is located in one of the roads here to the northeast of Robotyne in the direction of Verbove, which would indicate that the Ukrainian forces were looking to gather their forces in this direction for a push towards Verbove, trying to push through the Russian line of defense in this direction. So the Ukrainian forces seem to be pushing their main forces to the east of Robotyne instead of to the south towards Novoprokopivka. And this is why we're seeing the Russian forces counterattacking in this direction. If they're able to split the Ukrainian forces up so that they can't focus all of them towards Verbove, they're able to weaken the fist and blow of the Ukrainian forces before they start their attack in the direction of Verbove. I had a bit of footage that I wanted to cover as well. However, I cannot, as I have recently been targeted by the YouTube demonetization again. So I will refrain for that for the time being to avoid such complications. And for the northern parts by the Luhansk-Kharkiv border, we also see fighting here in direction of the Kharkiv border by the Russian forces as they attempt to expand their bridgehead across. We see that they managed to advance a slight bit in this direction, and as such we see that they are attempting further operations here, again trying to divert Ukrainian forces. And this was actually mentioned by Thetai Mapping. He made a post on Twitter where he mentions a couple of brigades, the 13th Jaeger Brigade, the 32nd Mechanized Brigade, 42nd Mechanized Brigade, 43rd Mechanized Brigade, 44th Mechanized Brigade, which are all NATO-trained brigades, which were dedicated for the Ukrainian offensive. And what we have seen and what he's reported on is that first the 13th Jaeger Brigade has been spotted around the Kupiansk area, after which military summary reported it being in the direction of Kharkiv. The 32nd is fighting by the Luhansk front by Novoselivsk. The 42nd was fighting by Kreminna. The 43rd is fighting by the Serebets River, so the area the Russians are attacking in. The 44th Mechanized Brigade is fighting by Liman. And as such, we see that these NATO-trained brigades, which were dedicated for the offensive, is instead fighting in the Luhansk area. This is because of the Russian buildup of troops and offensive operations in these areas. So the Russian purpose was clearly to divert the Ukrainian forces from the south to the north. So instead of pushing through in the south with these units, which are 5 brigades, 20,000 troops, that instead were diverted to the northern parts as well as to Kharkiv. So the Ukrainian forces were forced to split up their forces instead of focusing on the offensive due to offensive operations by the Russian forces, which is why we're seeing them advance slowly, because the Ukrainians sent reinforcements to hold the lines. So basically what we're seeing is that the Ukrainian forces have started their final push with 20,000 soldiers across the northern front instead of to support them and take advantage of any breakthrough they do manage to achieve, if they manage to achieve one. So the Ukrainian forces are here splitting their forces up between Vuhledar and Orikhiv, while they already are in a lack of troops due to the splitting of their forces. So they're splitting them even more. So this makes no sense in my opinion. Why would they attack from multiple directions if they're already splitting up their forces? Maybe this is why their offensive is having such a hard time. But that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.